This is the Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Now, there are currently 50,000 pubs in Britain, but they are closing at a rate of knots, up to 30 per week. To their supporters, the pub is a great British institution that is part of the fabric of society. However, pubs do have to face a number of barriers. Smoking bans, VAT on food sales, the beer duty escalator, as well as considerable competition with supermarkets that sell alcohol at reduced prices. Pubs employ hundreds of thousands of people and have been a way for people to socialise in Britain for hundreds of years. So should the government do something to save them? While not quite on the endangered species list just yet, what is the future of the British pub? Well, joining me to discuss this, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Ignacio Cabras. He's a reader in economics, business and management at Newcastle Business School at Northumbria University. Also here is Martin Hillier, founder of the Micro Pub movement and also owner of the Butcher's Arms. That's the smallest free house in England. Also here is Tom Stainer, head of communications for the Campaign for Real Ale. And on the line, we're joined by James Morris, director of the Alcohol Academy and editor of Alcohol Policy UK. That's a news website which offers an analysis for the alcohol harm reduction fields. A warm welcome to you all. Should all pubs be saved, Martin, or only some of them?
Good pubs will survive, but saying that, one's just sold in London for £27 million, and that did £2,000 a day profit, £700,000 a year profit that was making. But eventually, it's worth more as a house than it is as a pub.
£27 million. Whereabouts was that?
Bayswater Road, near the Queensway, Black Lion.
I would imagine that it's quite a historic pub, though. It's a building that's been around for hundreds of years.
300 years ago, yeah. And the price was, I think, Spirit Pub Company sold it.
But, I mean, if you've got a £27 million building, no pub is going to be able to keep trading if it's worth that amount of money. That's the danger of having a historic building in a very, very wealthy part of town.
Absolutely, and the danger at the moment to pubs is that the owning companies are seeing very quick profit to be made in selling them off for flat development or selling them to some of these supermarket chains develop into local stores. And prime sites like the Black Lion, or indeed across the country where pubs are in prime sites in central towns, often have parking. It's very difficult for a pub company to resist selling them off, and there's a growing myth that it's only bad pubs that close, and the danger is that these pubs are so attractive to sell on as development opportunities that even good pubs that are serving their communities well are being sold out from underneath very hard-working licensees that are running good businesses. And what CAMRA's campaigning for at the moment with the new Pubs Matter campaign is just to give communities a chance for a say, because at the moment there's loopholes in the planning law which allows pubs to be knocked down or have their use changed with no reference at all to either the local council or to the residents who use them.
So you would suggest that if it were down to the people that use them, or at least people in the area who maybe not use them, they would see the value of having or keeping the community pub in business?
It may be they decide they don't value it anymore, in which case it will go through the planning application process very, very quickly. So that I don't really understand why pub companies are very anti-consulting with the community. If it's true that the pub is failing and the community no longer want it, giving the community a say, and that say is no, we don't want it anymore, means they can do with the pub what they want. But at the moment, too many communities are losing these vital community assets without being asked.
Ignacio, do you think that they're community assets, the pub? I mean, an interesting comment or point by the Good Pub Guide. It said it's high time that bad pubs went out of business. This would give visionary and energetic licensees a chance to open new ones. They see it as perhaps a Darwinian struggle. The best ones survive and the worst ones don't.
Well, yes, I mean, as an economic phenomenon, the best one will always survive. We'll try to diversify the offer. We'll try to attract customers in different ways. Probably even as the Pub is the Hub is suggesting trying to combine services, especially in rural areas, pubs that can work as a post office or a village shop or a library. We see a number of examples over the country. Coming back to what Tom was saying, I think a pub is really an asset for any community, specifically in those communities that are remotely located, talking about rural communities or villages. Once the pubs go, village life die. Basically, these are the only place that allow people to come together, the only place that provide platforms for developing activities such as voluntary services, charities, as well as sport clubs or social clubs for retirees and for young people. So they are not only businesses, they are assets for the community, and we should try to preserve them because the benefits that they bring where they are open are much wider consider the economic fabric.
Now, I mean, Ignazio, you had the best job in the world. You got to go around something like 1,700 pubs and look at what they did in the communities. And I guess, I mean, once your liver had recovered, what were your conclusions? I mean, what kind of impact did, say, a pub closure have on a town or on a small rural area?
That level of community well-being, community cohesion, which is basically the level of the people that feel to belong to a community, if the pub is there, is definitely enhanced. They provide this kind of sense, and people really want to consider the community attached to the places. In our studies, well, we were lucky to study the pubs in Britain as well as in Ireland, and both the studies confirmed that there is a significant value in terms of not only economic value, but also social value when the pub is open compared to when they were closed in the local areas. These places are important because they sustain the local community as well as the local economy. We noticed that, for example, the study that we conducted considered 1,700 pubs operating in 2,700 parishes, right? And those parishes where the pubs was open were doing better in terms of providing services because the pubs were doing that. On those pubs where the pubs wasn't there, people felt a bit depressed, not only because they couldn't find any place to stay together, but also because they couldn't find the essential services.
James, I'll bring you in. You're editor of Alcohol Policy UK, and I'm just wondering, is there a mixed message or at least mixed policy coming from, say, the British government where, on the one hand, they do want to curb binge drinking, but on the other, some would say that the pub is actually perhaps has nothing to do with binge drinking. Binge drinking is something that you do outside of a pub, and that pubs actually do need to get a bit more of a government focus to help save them?
Well, yes, I certainly think this government's alcohol policy can be accused of mixed messages, not least U-turning on its minimum pricing promise in 2012. And that leads on to a really key issue here, which is the big shift of consumption from predominantly something that was done, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s on the on-trade, so in pubs and bars and so on. But over the last 20 years, we've seen this really big shift, a huge shift into off-trade sales in terms of most of the volume of alcohol now being bought for off-sales purposes or home drinking. So that's been the real rise. And you mentioned at the start a wide range of influences for the decline of the pub, but it's almost certainly the price disparity and the increasing affordability of off-trade sales versus on-trade and the squeeze of incomes. In 2012, the government consulted on or set out a number of changes around how they labelled rebalancing the Licensing Act. And part of that was intended, or the rhetoric was around trying to put a focus back on kind of communities, reducing them from the problems of antisocial behaviour. But it was a very mixed message, and some of the changes were actually still focused on the on-trade, for instance, a late-night levy or early morning restriction orders, which would put fees or stop late-night sales from on-trade premises, but didn't really actually recognise the issue that there's on-trade sales that are really probably in most cases fueling what might be areas of particular harmful drinking. So we hear a lot about preloading now, young people who are kind of more likely to be heavier or binge drinkers, as you might call it, buying cheap alcohol to consume in the home before going out.
So you would advocate a minimum price for alcohol in that case then, to stop that?
Certainly the evidence is clear that a minimum unit price policy would be probably one of the most effective things that you could do if you want to address alcohol misuse at a national level. It's absolutely not a panacea. It's not going to change a problematic drinking culture overnight, but certainly price is a leading driver of harmful alcohol consumption. But there's lots of nuances and issues within this, but I suppose what I would say is that the pubs are in most cases well-run environments, a regulated environment where a drinker is offered a number of protections. In theory, the server can say when they've had enough and not serve them, or help someone if that's needed be, as well as all those kind of community spirit aspects of it. Whereas obviously the off-trade and what happens behind closed doors is a whole other ball game. So the longer-term health risks of regular heavy drinking in the home are evident in our still rising alcohol-related hospital admissions, as well as all the links with domestic violence and other issues, which can really be a hidden issue behind closed doors. So I'm a supporter of well-run pubs and think that they can be part of the solution to addressing problematic drinking. But until we really kind of do redress this balance between rising off sales and very cheap alcohol that's often sold as a loss leader to get people through the doors, then we're really going to try and struggle to turn this around.
Okay, Martin, you're owner of the Butcher's Arms, the smallest free house in England. You've started this movement, the micropub. Can you just tell me what a micropub actually is and how does it differ from a normal-sized or big, large chain pub?
It's individually run. My little pub is 4 metres by 3 metres. It used to be the Butcher's Arms. It used to be the Butcher's in the village. I had it licensed before as an off-licence, and when the licensing laws changed in 2005, I said to my takeaway real ale customers, I can turn this into a pub, and they all jumped at it. I said, fantastic. And because it's that small and there's no bar, everybody faces each other. So you start talking. And you'll talk to more people in my pub than you will do in big pubs. Because all my pub is one bar of how pubs used to be. Pubs used to have 3 bars. You used to have a public bar, saloon bar, and a snug bar. And you chose which bar you went in depending on who you were. So my little pub caters just for real ale drinkers, be it ladies as well. And we do a little bit of wine, no spirits. It's only open lunchtimes between 12 and 1:30. Might go on to 2:30, 3 o'clock if there's people in there. Then we close, opening it at 6 until 9. That's when it's definitely open. It normally goes on till 11. But by reducing those hours, like old pub times, people have to come in when you're open. Pubs that are open all day, you can go in there at 9 o'clock in the morning now, sit there all day and drink, and then go home at 11 o'clock. People that have been working all day come in at 6 o'clock. Don't want to be mixing with people that have been drinking all day. Doesn't work.
So quite an interesting approach, but you're sort of harking back to a more traditional time when that was the case. That was how we drank beer.
Yeah, it was special. 6 o'clock. Let's go down the pub. Now it's not special anymore now to go down the pub. And Sunday lunchtimes was really brilliant before. It used to be 12 to 2, then extended to 12 to 3. You knew in those 3 hours everybody went down the pub. So
and 4 metres by 3 metres, how many people could you fit in that?
Good number's 18. The record's 37.
And everyone knows each other by the end of the...
Absolutely, yeah. And friendships being formed. It's brought the village back together, and a marriage, and even a baby has appeared.
Fantastic. But, I mean, is that you've opened that, is that kind of an admission of that the old-style pub perhaps doesn't work, or you have to kind of reimagine it a bit? I mean, the idea of a pub being open all day up until 11 o'clock, it may not just be profitable. This is probably more profitable for you.
Absolutely. You're not paying staff all day, light, heat, all the rest of it, all reduced. And because the rateable value is less than 6,000, I don't pay any business rates. And my turnover is not above the VAT threshold, so I don't pay VAT on my sales.
I mean, where do you see yourself in the fight for the British pub? Do you see it sort of, the British pub as integral to preserving kind of good old English ale, or what?
Absolutely. And the first thing I'd say is if you think you don't like beer, you probably just haven't tried the right one yet. It's a bit like saying I don't like music. There is definitely one out there that you will really enjoy. For CAMRA, the pub is the only place you can drink cask-conditioned British beer. Which is why it's absolutely vital that we continue to promote it through the pub and promote pubs. And what Martin's doing with micropubs is fantastic as well, because it gives a very low cost entry to the pub industry for people who've always dreamed of running a pub. And it allows them to avoid maybe signing up for some of these slightly less well thought out pub tenancies, which end up costing them a lot of money and a lot of stress. And also micropubs are being able to fill in the gaps that maybe the big pub companies are leaving in closing the pubs down. So micropubs as part of the pub industry are absolutely fantastic in providing a range of different places you can go and drink real ale. But then again, micropubs also can't provide some things other big pubs can. And you can go to a pub, you can watch live music, you can have your wedding there, you can I know Martin's not keen on music, but you can have weddings there, you can have christenings there, you can have after-work parties, you can have leaving do's, and when new people arrive at work, you take them down the pub, and it's the first time you can get to know people. So the pub is absolutely vital in so many different ways, and whether it's a small micro pub like Martin's and you're approaching 100 now across the country, are you?
Should be by the end of the year.
Which is just, and it's been an explosion of that, and they just balance out these other great different types of venues, and that's what's great about the British pub, in that you can get so many different types of pubs. They can fit what you need, whether you want to go out late with your friends or you want a quiet drink in the afternoon. But it is that place where you can get cask-conditioned beer and you can talk to people and you can get that breakdown of social barriers you don't really get in any other institution in British life.
Martin, I saw you wince when he mentioned music and football. The purist doesn't like that, right?
You go down the pub to talk to people, not to listen. You can do that at home. You can watch TV at home. You can cook and eat at home. What you can't do at home is drink real ale and chat with your mates.
Absolutely, and the great thing about micro pubs is if you just want to go and drink a nice, great, well-kept, well-chosen pint of beer, you can go to somewhere like Martin's pub. If you are a football fan and you don't want to sit on your own watching it on your flat screen and you want to talk to people and get that social interaction, you can go to a bigger sports pub. If you want some live music, you can go to some of the great live music venues that also serve real ale. If you want some nice food, you can go to some of the great pubs that serve great food. If you want a family experience. And the thing about the pub is it's not just one thing. You can't define it easily. If pubs are working right in your town, there should be something for everyone. And that's why it's important that every pub, if it's going to be closed, at least the community are given a chance to say, you know what, we value this pub. If they don't value it, fine. As I said before, we're not anti-business. We're not saying that people should keep open pubs regardless of how viable they are. It's just at the moment that communities are not getting that say.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. What is the future of the British pub? Well, I'm discussing that with Martin Hillier, owner of the Butcher's Arms. That's the smallest free house in England. Also with me is Dr. Ignacio Cabras, who is a lecturer in economics, business and management at the Newcastle Business School. Tom Stainer, who is head of communications for the Campaign for Real Ale, that's CAMRA. And on the line, we have James Morris, editor of Alcohol Policy UK. James, what do you think about the idea of a micro pub? This is a great way to encourage responsible drinking among beer aficionados.
I think any pub that essentially is well run and keeps in check issues around the licensing objectives of preventing crime and disorder, protecting children, and generally a safe environment, then whatever form it comes in, whether it shows football or live music or not, I'm kind of generally pro pub. And certainly the social side of it is important. And of course, you do get at the end of some pubs which might be more about kind of people go there because they can, the drinks are significantly cheaper there, and they're not necessarily after good tasting ales, but want to kind of drink to get drunk maybe as part of a night out. So there is an issue as well with certain pubs that do have local areas are aware of as being kind of hotspots for crime and disorder, and that's about kind of looking at how well they're managed and regulated. But in terms of community pubs as part of something that we can look to as a solution to fostering a more kind of responsible social relationship with alcohol, then absolutely that's what we want, because as I said earlier, there is this big trend towards regular drinking in the home, that buying a bottle of wine with your supermarket shop for and drinking regularly or every night a week is a trend that we've seen, and that carries lots of long-term health risks, not just liver disease, as most people are aware of, but around 60 or so different medical diseases and conditions that we're seeing trends in. And liver disease is the only rising preventable disease in the country, that in the developing world, all the rest are falling. Of course, not just alcohol is contributing to rising liver disease rates, but diet and so on. But yeah, absolutely, micro pubs and other well-run pubs are, I think, part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Ignacio, a lot of the pubs that go out of business, they may complain, or at least what I understand is that they're often locked into exclusivity deals. They're tied houses. They can only sell beer, wine, and so on, supplied by the companies owning the premises. I mean, what kind of impact does that have on the bottom line for pub owners? Is this what's driving people away from the business?
Well, it depends. I mean, I can definitely agree with you 4 or 5 years ago, but the last data release, probably in the past 2-3 years, confirmed that there is a trend for pub companies to close the pubs. So basically, we are seeing a revival of independently owned businesses. So basically, there are more businesses now in the pub sector that actually run as independent, and they have the choice, free choice of what kind of beer they want to provide, how to run their pubs, what kind of customers they want to attract. So for the past 10-15 years, the sector has seen a lot of changes. Of course, the rise of the pubcos have brought the tie system, has been pushed such a way that the last financial crisis have put many big companies like the large enterprise in to suffer problems and to leave a number of estates in the market. And now these estates, the same spots, are bought from free entrepreneurs. They're actually reviving the pubs as it was before the rise of the pub companies 20, 30, 40 years ago.
So pubcos have been a negative influence, do you think, on the industry?
They had, but even before the pubcos, the tie system was in place, has been introduced in the Great War, and since then has characterized the industry for the past 17, 80 years. What the pubcos did is actually industrialize this kind of system and pushing it to a limit that basically the tenants couldn't afford a decent living by renting a pub. That's the problem that they created. But this is economics.
And Camera's looked at average wages of pub company tenants, and more than half them on less than minimum wage, and it's just for many of them the balance is completely skewed in the favour of these big property owning companies, and it's almost impossible for licensees to make a fair living out of it. And you're actually right that this is driving them out of the business because they're spending their life savings, they're being expected to pay repairs on the pubs, and they are property companies. We call them pubcos, but actually they're property companies, and they've borrowed huge amounts of money, and the rising interest rates on those massive debts they've got means they always have to be putting the rent up on the pubs. They always have to be making bigger and bigger margins on the beer that they force the tenants to buy off them. And it just makes it more and more impossible for a pub company tenant to make a fair living out of pubs. And this is why it was mentioned earlier that this was sort of Darwinism and survival of the fittest, and that would be fair if it was a fair market. But actually, there's so many factors that are not just reflecting a free market. It's licensees are operating under all these different pressures that mean that it is often very, very fit licensees which are finding it impossible to make a living.
But I mean, before the rise of pubcos, you still had monopolies, and that's why the beer orders came in, which stipulated no brewery could have more than 2,000 tied houses. So what you've got is you've got a kind of massive conglomerate shifting to another kind of conglomerate.
Yeah, and the brewery tie system wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but at least the breweries had a vested interest in the pubs doing well because they produced the beer that was sold in the pubs, so they needed the pubs to stay open. If the pubs didn't stay open, they couldn't sell their beer. These big property companies, their business model is entirely based on the rents they get off those pubs. They don't really need them to run as pubs, and if they can sell them for more money, as 27 million was cited earlier, for redevelopment, they're going to do that instead of keeping them open as pubs.
Having said that, I mean, the pub companies basically opening the market to people that usually didn't have any connection with the pub sector, because before the pub businesses were basically run by families. And it was created by generations, so you could have the same family running the pubs for over 50, 60, 70 years, and even more. But with the pub companies, a huge amount of jobs in the pub sector went to people that basically didn't have any clue about how to run this kind of business. And this had an impact in the level of managerial expertise that you need in order to run this type of businesses. This had a huge impact.
What would Camera call for the government to do? I mean, I guess there's the annual beer duty escalator and so on, and sometimes that gets frozen. There's also a call for pubs not to pay VAT on food, which supermarkets don't have to. I mean, what does Camera want to see?
There's a general thing of just being supportive of the British pub industry, but what's really we're highlighting at the moment is it's not even intervention and it's not extra regulation. It's if they can close these loopholes in the planning law, which allows pubs to be closed, knocked down, or have their use changed to bookies or estate agents, almost overnight in some cases, with no reference to the local community. This is all we're asking at the moment with the Pubs Matters campaign, which is our current campaign, is just saying, go to the community, ask them, give them a chance. We're seeing lots of community buyout schemes at the moment where communities are actually putting their money where their mouths are. They're saying, we value this pub so much, we're going to put money in between us. We're going to buy the pub. We're going to give the owner a fair rate for it. So again, it's not anti-business. It's not expecting pubs to open regardless, and it's not expecting pub-owning companies to not realise their assets if they want to, but it's just giving a couple of weeks or a couple of months for communities to assess whether they want that local facility or not.
Martin, I mean, is it easier to make money from a wet-led pub?
Absolutely. You've got none of the costs of running a kitchen, a chef, waitress, music licences. You've cut all those out. So you're just dealing with the bare minimum beer, and I would say 95% of my turnover is beer. There's a little bit of wine and soft drinks.
Actually, get your view on this, Tom. There was the Great British Beer Festival, I think, a week ago. It was the Timothy Taylors that won overall.
I've just about recovered from the festival myself.
Fantastic. I mean, how popular are these festivals? Do they get more popular per year? Is Britain becoming more of a nation of ale and proper beer drinkers than, say, lager drinkers? And what kind of impact do these festivals have on, say, the perception of beer drinking?
Well, certainly, we saw around 55,000 people come across the threshold of Olympia in London last week, which shows how popular it is. And if you went down the festival floor at 6, 7 o'clock at night and saw the wide demographic of people who are enjoying the beers there are people in suits coming from work, there are lots of women. It's not your traditional stereotypical beer drinker. And we run several hundred beer festivals across the country, so there's always going to be one near you if you keep an eye out for it. And we're seeing numbers increasing there, and the enthusiasm for beer, I think, over the last couple of years has really grown. And what these festivals are great at doing is demonstrating that massive range of beer. And as I mentioned earlier, anyone who says, I don't like real ale, probably just hasn't been to a festival and tried a couple and said to a barman, what do you think I'd like? I like hops, I like malt, or going to a pub like Martin's and just, I don't know how many beers you have on regularly, but between those 3 or 4 that you have on regularly, I'm sure that any new person to the beer, to a real ale pub, you could probably give them guidance and provide them something they really like. So I think the interest is there. I think with this movement for what's described as craft beers, there's maybe a slightly younger, slightly trendier image to real ale these days.
That's going to be in a bottle, right?
Not necessarily. I know a lot of craft beers, they are cask beers. It's just there's been a slight rebranding and repositioning, and you look at some of the bars in London and now spreading out to the rest of the country, craft beer bars they're offering very interesting, exciting, very modernly branded beers.
So to the layman, what is the difference between a craft beer and say,
I don't think we've got long enough in this conversation to find it. I think the industry is still struggling to find it. I think craft beer is what you think it is at the moment, because there's no real technical definition. Real ale has a technical definition in that it continues to condition in the cask that it's served from. It has live yeast in there. It's not artificially carbonated. Some things described as craft beer maybe don't stick to that definition, but the people who drink them still say these are very good beers. And actually, CAMRA would support anything which is bringing more people into the beer sector and trying new beers and new tastes and learning hop names and realising the amazing flavours that brewers are creating from 4 very simple ingredients.
Speaking of amazing flavours, Martin, you've brought in some beer there, and one is extremely strong and is known as it's as strong as a wine, I understand. It's
a barley wine. It's from Manchester, J.W. Lee's Manchester, and I've matured this one in my cellar for 8 years, and it's extremely smooth and it's lovely. In fact, my auntie came down, who is not a beer drinker, and she had a sip of that and bought a bottle.
Do women are they attracted to this kind of beer? It does have a reputation for being a very male drink, doesn't it?
First of all, that won't touch it with a barge pole, but eventually they look around and in my pub they see other ladies drinking beer and they're the only one drinking wine. So they think, well, hang on a minute, let's give it a go then. And a lady used to come in, red wine, not white, just red wine. Now she's drinking full as ESB.
James, unfortunately you won't be able to taste any of this, but we do have some bottles here and we may have a wee sip.
The other one's a very light 3.7% citrusy type beer from Deal, Time and Tide Brewery.
Okay, Deal in Kent, isn't it?
Deal in Kent. And they've been going for about 18 months. And then next to that, I have a mild from Turner's Brewery in Sussex.
So this is 11%, this one.
And also you're getting amazing aroma off the top of that, and that's got complex and almost spirit-like brandy, whiskey aromas and raisins and fruitcake and
molasses.
And that's the molasses, yeah, that's absolutely lovely.
So it's the kind of, you would sample it in the way you would sample a fine whiskey almost.
I call that a dessert beer.
Yeah.
So after your Christmas dinner, if you're a beer drinker, you don't go on to a port, brandy, sherry or anything like that, you have a glass of that. And not a lot.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's very nice. And we just have time to try the slightly weaker one. In fact, it's 3.6%, you said. So
And again, just such an amazing different flavour to that beer, and it's made from the same ingredients essentially, just different processes, and that one's not been in your cellar for 8 years. And that's a lovely, refreshing, you can imagine drinking that, crispy, especially, well, I know the weather's changed recently, but the last couple of weeks you can imagine sitting in a beer garden somewhere and really enjoying that.
See, it sounds like there's a real complexity to appreciating fine beers that perhaps most people just simply don't have. What do you think about that, Mark?
Well, a lot of people think, I don't know if I like it or not. Well, you'll know if you like it. And people say, oh, you're this, you're that. No, just drink it.
The range of diversity is quite interesting in the market now, because I live in York, and basically every 2 years we organize the beer survey. Actually, we go to the pubs in the city, 214 York, so it's a huge amount for a city of 200,000 people. And 2 years ago, we actually had 180 Cascades real ale beers on sale. But this year, we got 25% more. So there is a demand for this type of beer. And I agree with Martin. I mean, you can see this is without any kind of difference in terms of gender, class, race, ethnicity. Everybody, if the beer is good, will go for a good beer. And in York, as well as in other cities, I know about Derby, Norwich, Sheffield, the quantity, the variety, the amount of different type of real ales is actually beating the one in kegs, the carbonated ones. So, I mean, I think we are a beer drinking nation. We were, and we are reviving that kind of feeling that we had.
And it's going to work quicker because of micropubs, because we can now get it to the customers. A micropub, you can open a micropub, and depending on the building, it could be as little as $5,000 to open your own pub. It could be as much as $30,000. Then it gets this 1,200 microbreweries now in the country, and their big problem is, who do they sell it to? If they sell it to the big boys, it's got to go through the network, and it ends up really expensive. This way, it's from them to me.
But also, just quickly, James, before we go, I guess it does also require a change in attitude to drinking beer. I mean, here we have in front of us some fine beers, and this 8-year-old one is particularly nice. But it does require perhaps an appreciation of alcohol that most people in Britain don't have, except for a select few.
I think there's some interesting issues about sort of alcohol use through the life course, and certainly if you look at who's most likely to drink heaviest in terms of age, it's younger drinkers are typically more likely to binge drink. But for a lot of young people growing up in a kind of culture where drunkenness is normalised and alcohol isn't necessarily about good taste or whatever, it's about drinking to get drunk for many young people, then there are some sort of important policy measures that might help us try and redress that shift.
And on that point of younger drinkers, I mean, Tom, can you see perhaps people, they can go to a pub at the age of 18? Do you think that they could perhaps be turned towards ale? It could change its image, perhaps.
I think the image is already changing. I think the recent revolution we've had in beers and the much younger market that brewers are aiming for is a recognition that young drinkers and older drinkers are much more selective in what they spend their money on. We've talked already about the very big difference in price between off-trade and on-trade, and the fact that people don't have the same amount of money for leisure spend anymore. So they are more selective, and it means if they go to a pub or a bar, they want a very good experience. So they might be happy to pay a bit more for a very, very good real ale, which has something about it, is interesting, is unique, is from a brewery with a story, rather than just paying for a very bland, mass-marketed pint.
So just finally, Martin, are you optimistic about the future of the British pub?
Well, I can definitely see a bright future for micropubs. We're nearly up to 100 by the end of the year. Thanet has got about 15 now. But the other thing about beer is there's twice the amount of hops in a beer than there is in a lager generally. And hops are highly soporific. So if you drink a lot of beer, you fall asleep. Because in the old days, Grandma would stuff your pillow full of hops if you weren't sleeping too well. Whereas lager, you go out and fight everybody. And what's all this Red Bull and vodka? There's no soporific effect in that at all. That's why at rugby matches, there's no trouble because they all drink beer. Football matches, not even allowed to drink lager.
Interesting. I didn't know that, and I have to say that is absolutely delicious. That the flavours in that 8 years in the making. It sounds like that's all we've got time for. Martin Hillier, there, owner of the Butcher's Arms. That's the smallest free house in England, and he's the founder of the micropub movement. Also here, Ignacio Cabras, reader in economics, business and management at Newcastle Business School at Northumbria University. Tom Stainer, head of communications for CAMRA. That's the Campaign for Real Ale. And on the line, James Morris, director of the Alcohol Academy and editor of Alcohol Policy UK. That's a website that offers analysis for the alcohol harm reduction field. Many thanks for joining me, Brendan Cole, on The Voice of Russia in London. This is The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Now, there are currently 50,000 pubs in Britain, but they are closing at a rate of knots, up to 30 per week. To their supporters, the pub is a great British institution that is part of the fabric of society. However, pubs do have to face a number of barriers. Smoking bans, VAT on food sales, the beer duty escalator, as well as considerable competition with supermarkets that sell alcohol at reduced prices. Pubs employ hundreds of thousands of people and have been a way for people to socialise in Britain for hundreds of years. So should the government do something to save them? While not quite on the endangered species list just yet, what is the future of the British pub? Well, joining me to discuss this, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Ignacio Cabras. He's a reader in economics, business and management at Newcastle Business School at Northumbria University. Also here is Martin Hillier, founder of the micropub movement and also owner of the Butcher's Arms. That's the smallest free house.
In prime sites in central towns often have parking. It's very difficult for a pub company to resist selling them off, and there's a growing myth that it's only bad pubs that close, and the danger is that these pubs are so attractive to sell on as development opportunities that even good pubs that are serving their communities well are being sold out from underneath very hard-working licensees that are running good businesses. And what CAMRA's campaigning for at the moment with the new Pubs Matter campaign is just to give communities a chance for a say, because at the moment there's loopholes in the planning law which allows pubs to be knocked down or have their use changed with no reference at all to either the local council or to the residents who use them.
So you would suggest that if it were down to the people that use them, or at least people in the area who maybe not use them, they would see the value of having or keeping the community pub in business?
It may be they decide they don't value it anymore, in which case it will go through the planning application process very, very quickly. So that I don't really understand why pub companies are very anti-consulting with the community. If it's true that the pub is failing and the community no longer want it, giving the community a say, and that say is no, we don't want it anymore, means they can do with the pub what they want. But at the moment, too many communities are losing these vital community assets without being asked.
Ignacio, do you think that the community assets, the pub, I mean, an interesting comment or point.
A much wider consider the economic fabric.
Now, I mean, Ignacio, you had the best job in the world. You got to go around something like 1,700 pubs and look at what they did in the communities. And I guess, I mean, once your liver had recovered, what were your conclusions? I mean, what kind of impact did, say, a pub closure have on a town or on a small rural area?
That level of community well-being, community cohesion, which is basically the level of the people that feel to belong to a community, if the pub is there, is definitely enhanced. They provide this kind of sense, and people really want to consider the community attached to the places. In our studies, well, we were lucky to study the pubs in Britain as well as in Ireland, and both the studies confirmed that there is a significant value in terms of not only economic value, but also social value when the pub is open compared to when they were closed in the local areas. These places are important because they sustain the local community as well as the local economy. We noticed that, for example, the study that we conducted considered 1,700 pubs operating in 2,700 pubs.
In England. Also here is Tom Stainer, Head of Communications for the Campaign for Real Ale. And on the line, we're joined by James Morris, Director of the Alcohol Academy and Editor of Alcohol Policy UK. That's a news website which offers an analysis for the alcohol harm reduction field. A warm welcome to you all. Should all pubs be saved, Martin, or only some of them?
Good pubs will survive, but saying that, one's just sold in London for £27 million, and that did £2,000 a day profit, £700,000 a year profit that was making. But eventually, it's worth more as a house than it is as a pub.
£27 million. Whereabouts was that?
Bayswater Road, near the Queensway, the Black Lion.
I would imagine that it's quite a historic pub, though. It's a building that's been around for hundreds of years.
300 years ago, yeah. And the price was, I think Spirit Pub Company sold it.
But, I mean, if you've got a £27 million building, no pub is going to be able to keep trading if it's worth that amount of money. That's the danger of having a historic building in a very, very wealthy part of town.
Absolutely, and the danger at the moment to pubs is that the owning companies are seeing very quick profit to be made in selling them off for flat development or selling them to some of these supermarket chains develop into local stores and prime sites like the Black Lion or indeed across the country where pubs...
By the Good Pub Guide, it said it's high time that bad pubs went out of business. This would give visionary and energetic licensees a chance to open new ones. They see it as perhaps a Darwinian struggle. The best ones survive and the worst ones don't.
Well, yes, I mean, as an economic phenomenon, the best one will always survive. We'll try to diversify the offer. We'll try to attract customers in different ways. Probably even as the Pub is the Hub is suggesting trying to combine services, especially in rural areas, pubs that can work as a post office or a village shop or a library. We see a number of examples over the country. Coming back to what Tom was saying, I think a pub is really an asset for any community, specifically in those communities that are remotely located, talking about rural communities or villages. Once the pubs go, village life die. Basically, these are the only place that allow people to come together, the only place that provide platforms for developing activities such as voluntary services, charities, as well as sport clubs or social clubs for retirees and for young people. So they are not only businesses, they are assets for the community, and we should try to preserve them because the benefits that they bring where they are open